Welcome to our podcast, Born Again Credit, where credit is restored, not just repaired. This is your host, Salvation's Call Ministries, bringing you another episode by our Born Again Credit division. But I want to thank you for joining us today. As many of you have seen, we have a blog. We also have this podcast that we produce and put out. It follows along with the topic of the blog. But it also gives some additional insight, some personal experiences that we've been through and we've tried to help individuals with through our ministry. But today we're going to discuss charge-offs and repossessions. Charge-offs and repossessions. And these are two dirty words when it comes to church etiquette, if you will. If you're a Christian, you've been around the church for some period of time, people don't like to talk about their struggles in life. Unfortunately, sometimes when people get around other believers, they want to sound as best or as put together as possible, and that's not the purpose of the church. The purpose of the church is to help other people understand what we're going through and to reach out and to seek help, to seek guidance, to seek the hand of another believer in prayer and in whatever way they can help possible. But when you say these two terms here, of course it brings a negative view in anyone's eyes, whether it be in the church or in society in general. But we're going to discuss these two dirty terms, charge-offs and repossessions. They're two terms that I see a lot of people don't really understand or know the difference in. But in a lot of ways they're similar. So you might have been reading an article or listening to the podcast because you've been in a little bit of a situation and bit off more than you can chew, if you will. And you may feel overestimated just how far your budget could go. You may feel that you did a little bit more than you could. You couldn't handle the finances, or a situation happened in your life and it set you back. And maybe you lost a job or there was a career change and things didn't go the way you expected. And it's always possible. It's life. It's called life, and it happens. When you have debts and obligations and then you have a setback like that, it's bound to happen if there's no emergency fund. And to be honest, most Americans don't have an emergency fund. But don't get yourself in a situation where you feel pressured, you're feeling judged, because the same person that judges you could wind up in the same situation tomorrow. I've already mentioned in several articles, and I've seen where 29% of American households have less than $1,000 saved. That's nearly 30% of American households. Less than $1,000 saved. Guys, we're basically standing on thin ice, and if anything breaks, we're going to sink. And only 18% of Americans have enough funds to cover 3 to 5 months of their household expenses. So their emergency fund is inadequate, and that's only 18% of Americans. So at the best, most generous estimates, only 1 out of 5 Americans have enough to cover 3 to 5 months of their household expenses and savings. So most individuals, if they were to lose their income today, they'd be in that same boat. Okay. As a country, many of us live on credit. And the problem is most individuals who have no savings many times are the same individuals who have no credit. Some of us may have savings and no credit, and some people may have credit and no savings. But the problem is that a lot of times it's hard to get one without the other, because honestly, somebody without a whole lot of money isn't going to be able to buy a whole lot and isn't going to be able to establish a whole lot of credit. But even if they do, have all those things, take away their income, and they most likely won't have good credit either. And without a way to pay for all that credit card debt, they would wind up back in the same situation. When you reflect back on credit card debt and you think America now has an average of $5,700, yeah, I said that right. The average is about $5,700 now on average. We're living on borrowed money, and sometimes things happen. Okay, when you're living on borrowed money, sometimes things happen. So what happens when we can't pay those bills and can't make those payments? Their cars are repossessed and the credit cards are closed. As the account goes in past due status, as it moves into a past due status, and you start getting collection calls, the worst damage is done to your credit already in the late payment reporting. So once the late payments begin reporting, you're talking about at least possibly even a 100-point decrease, maybe even more. It just depends on how the algorithm goes with the accounts that you have on your credit report. But repossessions, when considering repossessions, we're talking about cars here. Once a car, and it also could be, once again, a boat, maybe an ATV or something of that nature, but it's usually going to be a secure debt. But once a car loan goes about 90 days past due, some companies are a little more aggressive. They might be 60. Some might let it go to 120. But normally on average, about 90 days past due, they start looking for your car. Okay, they start looking for their property, because technically they do own the property until it's paid for. You don't own anything until it's paid for. But they begin looking for you to pay the entire balance of the past due payments as well as the current month. And they begin to take action. They might call a local towing company. A lot of these companies call themselves recovery companies of their choice, and they begin searching for your vehicle. And in the process, what happens is usually you aren't warned. Most of the time it's in the middle of the night. The creditor then takes the car, sends it, the towing company tows it to wherever their holding yard is, and they allow you to get your property from that location if necessary, if you want anything that's left in the vehicle. Otherwise, they'll put it on the lot and they'll wait for a sale to come up. They'll list that property in that sale, that auction, and they'll auction it off from there. But the big thing about this is where your rights are really important, because you have to be notified of the intent to auction the car, when and where. And you have the right to repurchase the vehicle. You also have the right to pay off the vehicle by paying the remaining balance plus any fees that they've tacked onto it. They usually try to exaggerate those a bit. But several other intentions and rights are required to be sent to you as a consumer. And a lot of times these processes and steps are skipped, or they're overlooked, or there's a lot of errors in them. But it's effectively a violation that could benefit you in the long run if these steps aren't followed, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But also, if you surrender your car voluntarily, if you take it back to the lot, if you tell them, look, I can't deal with it, you can come get it, I'm going to tell you exactly where it's at, it's not going to matter. It's going to count against your credit report just as bad as if they looked for your car for 2 months and couldn't find it. I wouldn't suggest hiding a car from anyone. That can get rather sticky legally, but it's not going to really matter if you surrender the car voluntarily or not. At least the good thing is that once you turn it in, you're not going to have it anymore regardless, versus them coming to take it in the middle of the night and then adding those fees to it. But they count it the same, and they basically use it as a tax write-off. Okay, they don't take a complete loss on this situation. A lot of people believe if it's a $20,000 car, well, I didn't pay the $20,000 balance, and now the company's out of $20,000, that's why they get the car. Well, that's kind of true, but not the full truth. What happens is that they're still going to try to recover the difference of the price of the car once it's sold on the auction. So, in other words, and this is where the fun part begins, even though they're going to get basically a tax write-off for any difference of the money they don't collect, they're going to still try to, sometimes they'll try to sue you for the difference of the price of the car in the auction. For example, say you got a $20,000 car loan, $20,000 car loan, and they repo it, and it's lost some value, or it's a sale, so they sell it for a whole lot less than what they could really get for it if they sold it to a private individual, but that's a whole nother story. So they sell it for $12,000 just because they want to go ahead and get some money from it. Well, that $8,000 that's left that wasn't paid, a lot of times they'll try to sue you for. They'll try to go after the remaining $8,000 balance and try to get you to foot the bill for it and go ahead and start paying on it. They'll have collectors start calling you. They'll even try to garnish your wages in certain circumstances and try to get their money back. Well, this is the deal. They get basically a tax incentive, and they get to write that money off if it then becomes a charge-off. Because repossessions, just like any other debt, can become a charge-off. They get the tax credit for it, and a lot of times they'll sell that debt. They'll turn around and sell that $8,000 debt to a debt collector, who then decides that they're going to go ahead and try to go after you for it and collect that debt. And they're going to try to make money off of it too. So by the time this exchanges hands 2 or 3 times, you got all these added fees and all this extra money that you didn't even borrow added to the whole situation, when the original creditor has already been compensated back for it. Because out of the millions of dollars or billions of dollars that they made the previous year, your $8,000 loss was tacked on to their tax credits, which went against any taxes that they would have paid. And if you don't know anything about tax rates for companies versus individuals, let's just say it's much easier for them to get out of their taxes than it is you. So the debt collectors buy the debt for pennies on the dollar, and then they try to sue you for it, or either they'll harass you for it. The beautiful thing is that many times, by the time this all happens, by the time it's all said and done, and you get tired of them contacting you, what they call the statute of limitations, and it's different for every state. Some states might be 1 or 2 years. Some states might be 8 or 9. Not 8 or 9, but 7. As long as a debt can be collected federally, that state will extend it to the maximum. So maybe not 8 or 9, but the full 7 years is where it'll stop. But most states are a lot less than that. I know our state's, I believe, 3. So it just depends on what state you're in, where the statute of limitations stops. So if they say they're suing you, I would go ahead and as soon as I can, check the statute of limitations and see if they can actually do that. But the best thing is just not to discuss anything with them, because if they're not going to put something on paper to delete it off your credit report, well, my suggestion is not to talk to debt collectors, okay? But many types of debt can be charged off. So we're going to talk about specifically more like charged off credit cards. But most common types of debts that are charged off are credit cards, and a lot of times you see other debts charged off as well, some student loans, especially private, but a lot of times it's credit cards on people's report. So when the bill's not paid, credit cards go into past due status, and then they're sent to collections. And then when collections efforts fail, sometimes they'll sue the customer, and that's called a judgment. And the same thing works for any other debt, like a repo or whatever. That charged off account allows the creditor to take that balance and use it to write off their taxes. But, of course, like I said, they'll still go after you for it. So it's kind of like they're double dipping there. But remember that before you are guilt tripped, before you are judged about any debt, if it's not the original creditor, remember that company didn't loan you a thing. And don't allow them to guilt trip you, because the damage has already been done to your credit report. So you're already paying for it. Because the next car or vehicle you get, the next thing that you finance, the next time that you try to use your credit, you're going to pay for it dearly. So remember, Any collection company that calls you, they're most likely not the original creditor. So don't allow them to guilt trip you. Know your rights, okay? And just to give you a little background on the system, it's important, to pay back your bills, to pay back those that you owe money to, as long as they're not taking advantage of you, okay? Not abusing your rights. And if debt's used incorrectly, it can be a burden on your family. Always remember that. But allowing the system to manipulate us makes the situation so much worse for our families. And there are several notices creditors are required to send you when they're repossessing a car, or and charging off the account. What you have to be very aware of your rights, very aware of what's required when they want to auction off your car or repossess your car. And you're actually, like I mentioned, allowed to attend the auction by law or even pay off the balance. If any of those steps are skipped in the process, that account can be legally challenged through the credit bureaus, and it's very possible to see them deleted when disputed correctly. I've done this many times. If it's not legal, if it wasn't done correctly, they can be disputed, or disputed altogether without even going that route, without even having to deal with the steps that were taken. It's also helpful to know that depending on your state, like I mentioned before, that statute of limitations, which basically prevents a company from suing you for the balance. So if it's been a couple of years and your state has a 2-year statute of limitation, well, obviously you want to be as aggressive as you can about getting it deleted off your credit report, because it's hurting you and your family. You're having to pay more for bills that cost the next person, nearly a third less than what you're paying, just because of an interest rate. So let's help your family out by getting that stuff handled, getting it lowered. And you'll have more money and more cash in your pocket to give, to be a blessing to others, to take care and provide for your family. And just know that the statute of limitations covers both secured and unsecured debts most of the time, depending on the laws of your state, and that the scare tactics that they use for a debt that's 4 or 5 years old may not even matter, because, like I said, there's always a statute of limitations there. But regardless of how you got in a position, know that you have basic rights, and they should never, ever be violated, and never, ever force you to feel guilt or pressure from that debt. And if you're in a rough spot in life and find yourself in a place you cannot pay your bills, remember that life's basic needs come first. Safety, shelter, food, and clothing has to come before those creditors. Don't allow them to rob you of your basic rights. Of course, by design, society is set up to pressure you and to make you feel guilty about those debts, and to tell you that you got to go without basic needs just because society says things are supposed to be a certain way. Well, who do you think helps create those unwritten rules in society? Well, it's the credit organizations, the creditors themselves. They force this situation to be a moral situation. In a case where you've got a family that can't afford, if they can't afford their vehicle, can't afford to get to work, have lost their job, and in some other horrible situation, why should they allow those unwritten rules of society to govern how they take care of their family? They have to take care of their family, and that should never, ever be the decision-making processes to think about these debts first and then eating later. The kids have to eat, you have to work, and the basic bills have to be paid. Got to keep the electricity in the house on, on, and you got to keep gas in the tank to get to work or whatever. So don't let these guys guilt trip you. But those who believe the lies of the system often have no empathy because they've never gone through a situation where money was an issue. And if they have, they must have forgotten what it was like. Just like with any other faith and moral-based matter, ignore opinions and go with the word of the Lord. Go with His conviction in your life and His direction. He will never lead you wrong. He's never going to lead you down the wrong path. Demand that the system respect your freedom, and I honestly encourage you to seek spiritual and financial redemption today. Don't allow these companies to keep you chained in the bondage of debt. But I want to give you some helpful words from God and some scripture to remember, okay? Proverbs 22:7 tells us, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. When you borrow, and you borrow, and you borrow, you become a servant to that lender, because you have to then go and work just to pay off those debts. So remember, the more you borrow, the more you're going to owe back. Now, we all know that debt, there's sometimes what you would call a debt that works for you and a debt that works against you. Use debt to your advantage. Don't allow yourself to be put in a situation where you're a servant to that lender, okay? Be smart when it comes to credit. Also, there's another scripture I'd like to go over with you, and that is, see if I can pull it up here, Proverbs 28:6, and better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one perverse in his ways, though he be rich. So walk in integrity even if you have nothing, because it's better to be that way than to be perverse and be rich. Okay, so even these larger organizations, whose morality and honesty have fallen to the wayside, it's better to be the poor guy. Okay, especially if you're living with integrity and in the honor of the Lord. But I want to remind you that even though we've coached you here on some situations, that we're not attorneys. We don't have any attorneys on staff here at the ministry. This is just a ministry that wants to help and guide people in the best direction in life when it comes to not only spiritual matters but financial and more credit matters. But no advice or law stated on our site should be used to replace sound legal advice. If you have legal questions or you're in need of legal consultation, please seek your attorney. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But before we depart today, I want you to repeat after me right now, because attitude is everything and faith is everything when it comes to getting yourself in a financial situation, a credit situation where God can help you restore your credit. God can begin to do work through your credit to help put you in a better position in life. But I want you to repeat after me right now. I am a child of the one true God, who is loving and faithful. He has plans to prosper and not harm me, to give me hope in a future. My credit will be restored and I will live in abundance. I have good credit. I have good credit. I have good credit. And we want to thank you for joining us here on Salvation Call Ministries Born Again Credit, and for joining us. And we want you to take a minute and check us out online. Even send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to join us as a partner and let us assist you in your credit restoration journey today. The costs are minimal, and we can help you wherever you are in your credit journey today. But most importantly, if you haven't given your life to Christ as your Lord and Savior, I'd encourage you to do that and to seek Him above all things. Before you ever lay an eye on your credit report or try to fix any other issue in your life, seek Christ today. John 14:6 tells us that Jesus Himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And if you want to run the streets of heaven one day and be with Jesus, get with Him, my friend, and give Him your heart today. But I want to thank you for joining us once again. Take care of your families, and be blessed. Amen.